Hey everyone, this is smpratte, and we are finally making the long-awaited video that is probably the most frequent question I've received. When am I going to make a podcast or interview Gary from Pawn Stars? So here we are, now it's finally time. And as most saw in that previous video, Gary just closed on a pretty big deal, a very unique deal as well. So right out of the gate, I just want to get your feelings, after we slept on and everything, the dust has settled. How do you feel about this deal and just your general thoughts and opinions about everything?
Great question. First of all, hello to everybody, and I've been looking forward to this for a long time also. I've been a fan of Scott's for many years, and the things he's done to help our hobby and progress it to where it is, I'm very grateful for. So,
just for the record, Gary does this every single time I make a video. I'm like, okay, this is going to be the general outline, and he just comes in with the plug. But yeah.
Well, it really does mean a lot to me, and even if you don't know it, it means a lot to us and to our hobby. The deal we made yesterday. I know I had said on many occasions that I wouldn't sell my cards, my collection, my Charizard collection, and it's been just so many times I've had requests and emails and pressure and offers. Hard to pass up offers. And I just wouldn't do it. So finally, my friend Steve, who hopefully you saw in the last video, if not, be sure to go back and watch that transaction video on smpratte, his website, or his YouTube channel, on his channel. I'm still old-fashioned. Anyway, he had been after me for years. He's been a great friend, almost like a brother. This is Steve, who I did the transaction with, for many years. Plus, he's been a great customer on top of all that, bought a lot of money and stuff and different types of collectible items. And he's been after me to buy my Charizard collection all these years. Finally, basically, to shut him up, I had to figure out a way to let him in. And so the way that transaction went, if it wasn't clear in the video, was he gave me $81,000. The estimated value of the 21 cards he went partners with is about $500,000. And so we calculated the $81,000 into the $500,000, came out to 16%, which means he now owns 16% of those 21 cards for his $81,000 investment. I get to hold the cards until I die. When I die, things are written up and legal, and what's going to happen from there. Where he's going to get a chance to buy out the collection, or my wife and kids will have a chance to make it fair, refund money based on our current market value. Hopefully that'll be 20, 30 years from now. I'm actually 64, so and he's younger than me, so and healthier. Chances are he'll live longer. Anyway, that's the real, behind the story, behind the scenes story of that transaction.
Yeah, maybe next time I ask you what are your feelings on something, I should preface it by maybe steer clear of death. Maybe go right into the morbid aspect.
Right. Yes. Well, it's funny. The older you get and the closer it gets, the more you think about it.
Right.
So,
but I think it's good that you summarize it, because in that video that we did, it was very off the cuff. I think a lot of people were excited, even perhaps nervous, because it was. Clearly it's a historic deal, but beyond that, I think the whole percentage thing is kind of difficult for a lot of people to understand, because usually they think, okay, I have Charizard card and then you sell for X price and we're done.
Right.
But because this is such a high value situation, a percentage is something that really comes into play, because there are a lot of people not only don't have the capital, but you clearly don't want to sell the entire.
Right.
And this
or even a piece of it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think this is a great learning experience for a lot of people. Even for myself, I was like, it's a really good idea, because I think both parties were happy.
Right.
And it's something that happens with a lot of other assets, or however you want to term it. So
it does.
So what I actually did is wrote down some of the questions that people would ask me all the time on Q&As, and pretty much the most popular questions I'm going to throw at Gary and pick his brain on. So One of
Well,
those.
I'll do the best I can,
Yeah.
with it. I'm no expert interviewee, but okay, let's go.
I mean, you're definitely your prime time now. You've been on Pawn Stars, so.
Yeah.
But anyway, the number one question I get is, do you think Pokemon should bring back the first edition stamp?
And I get that question a lot also. And there's really no definitive answer. Every individual, depending on what angle they come from, has a different opinion on it. My opinion is based on being there from the very beginning when they were released. It was a very special time back then when those first edition boxes came out, because it was the initial release in the beginning of 1999, and anybody that was a collector, and I was very much a collector in the beginning, of other stuff, a lot of other stuff, that I saw value in that first edition stamp right away. All the packs, the boxes I got that were first edition, I saved. The reason I have such a Charizard collection is because of that fact. I saved those first edition cards because from the very beginning I saw them as a collectible and not as a play item, for my sons. And then, knowing that there would be how popular the game had been in Japan, knowing that there would be ultimately be more releases and a secondary release of that same set, like what turned out to be the Shadowless set and the Unlimited set. So, yes, that me coming from that angle kind of makes me protective of that first edition stamp being related to the original WotC cards.
Well, and I would even say that a lot of people value the first edition stamp in hindsight, because certainly people understood, okay, first edition is definitely rarer, more scarce than Unlimited. But
Can I say one thing? Plus, I realized at that time that first edition, I was told at the time it was going to be 10% of the overall release.
Yeah.
So yes, rarer by minimum 10 times.
Yeah, and that is definitely true for base set.
Yes.
I think base set is probably the most quantifiable set in the entire hobby.
True.
But then you start to see it gets a little blurry when you have the first edition for, like, let's say Jungle or Getting a Rocket and things like that. It's like, how much first edition for some limited? I don't. The general impression isn't exactly 10%, right. But yeah, I think a lot of people really value that stamp in hindsight, because I'm in a similar position where ideally I'd like to see the stamp just to give collectors something to chase now, but it's not going to have anywhere near the same value that the WotC stamp does.
Right.
Like basically what you described with the story, it's like you can't have this organic timeline that you did back then. You can't recreate that. So yeah, I think your story is just one more fact for that.
Yeah, but I can see it from the other angle too, of course, where that first edition stamp is, because I'm mainly a collector, that first edition stamp is a collectible booster. And I think even today that the newer sets, if they had first edition stamps, it would be a boost for the collectible side of the game. So if they had continued with the first edition stamp, I think it would have been better. If they are to begin using the first edition stamp today, it wouldn't break my heart, and it might be a bit of a collectible booster. It's so hard to tell until something like that happens.
And one thing I think we should mention is it's not going to be the WotC stamp. It'll be something that looks different if this fantasy ever came true.
Yes.
So yeah, that would be another thing, is that it wouldn't really harm the original, because the original is always going to look that way.
Absolutely agree with that. It would definitely take nothing away from the original.
Yes, for sure. So, kind of a fun question. Besides Charizard, which I actually knew the answer to this, you were surprised, but besides Charizard, what is your favorite Pokemon?
Oh yes, that is more than an interesting question, and it's probably going to be very surprising for everybody. Charizard is not my favorite Pokemon. Absolutely not, and never was. From the first time I opened up those base set cards, Venusaur just stood out to me, with his round face. It was kind of like we had pug dogs or boxer dogs that had their noses smushed in, and it just made you want to grab that dog's head and just feel and squeeze his face, because he had a scrunchy face with a punched in nose. Well, when I saw the Venusaur the first time, I had that same feeling. I just wanted to grab him by the nose and squeeze his nose, and so he made the first impression on me. And honestly, to this day, it has continued all along to be my favorite Pokemon. I don't have a giant Venusaur collection. I don't need to. That's pretty much in my heart. My love for Venusaur. Plus, I don't know if anybody has paid as close of attention as me, but I have at least one of every Venusaur for sure. There has never been, in my opinion, a bad picture of Venusaur. He just always looks awesome. And there's been some disappointing Charizards, in my opinion, for sure. But I don't care if they were, Bandai cards, or WotC cards, or yeah. I don't care what series or where they came from. I don't care if they were pictures or cartoons. He is just always awesome looking and attractive. So yeah, Venusaur is my favorite Pokemon.
That's so funny that because normally it's like Charizard's most popular than Blastoise, and then Venusaur's down there, and it's. I remember when you posted it online, I was like, "Is he trolling?" Because like, you had like every Charizard, the largest Charizard collection,
right?
But maybe it's to throw the set off the trail, so you can just collect the Venusaur's privately.
Maybe the safer answer to that is Venusaur is my second favorite, Charizard is my first favorite, because that's what everybody would expect.
Yeah,
but it wouldn't be true.
Yeah, even for me, yeah,
right.
So this is a question I get a lot as well. If you could change one thing in the hobby, what would it be? I know this is pretty broad, but
yes, yeah, that's a difficult one. Let me get a little answer out of you on that one. What do you feel about that?
I think if I could change anything in general, like we're talking about the big scope of everything. Right now, as it stands, I think there's a lot of people who are saying investing as as a buzzword, and I've actually need to probably address this in its own video. But I think the core, which majority of people in Pokemon, I think, are organically collecting. But I think the value of just having, like what you're saying with Venusaur, that story you told about the pug face or whatever. It's like as cringy as some people might think it is, as the cool guys might think that is. At the end of the day, it's like that's what it's all about, and that's why these markets exist. The irony of all this is that to actually create a genuine market, an organic market, is you need some organic interest. And I think that's probably the big, I don't know if it's really a change thing, but something that kind of makes me a little squinty-eyed. I'm like, all right, let's pump the brakes on all the what should I buy to make the most money type of stuff. It's good to have a financial sense, but it needs to be a genuine interest first. So
yeah, great point. Yeah, it does. Yeah, with things I would change, I mean, that seems to change with what year we're in. From the very, very beginning, I was, super opinionated, and I had pretty close communication ties with PSA, and went over a lot of things, had a lot of disappointments, it just constantly changed. And the interesting thing is that most of my feelings pretty much later became realities, not because of me, but just because they made sense. And I believe too often Pokemon, the Pokemon creators and the marketing departments gear it a little bit towards a younger age and the player's age instead of the collectors. I mean, this is a collector's game, 100%, and yet it's like it was never marketed that way. That's why when the Pokemon Company took over and Nintendo, when they did away with the first edition stamp, it was just another example of paying no attention to the collector side of the game, and just the player side, because they figure, what's the big deal about a first edition stamp? What does that mean? And they see these little things on Yahoo auctions and eBay auctions 15 years ago that it just didn't make sense to them to market to the collector. Marketing to the collector for all those years from like 2002 to 2012, all those years should have spent a little bit more time marketing to us, to the collectors.
Yeah, and I think when people talk about Pokemon, I mean, the slogan is "Gotta catch 'em all," and most people are here because of that nostalgic, classic collector experience that I think is analogous to everything, going back to sports, to art, to historical collectibles. There is this element of emotional value, and sure, the playability, like for example in Magic the Gathering, that's a very practical component, and I think it's very easy and quantifiable. It's very cut and dry. where this is a little more nuanced, but I would say that Pokemon is more in line, again, with those like vintage sports and things like that.
Yes.
So it just would make sense that, like, I think now in Japan at least, they do cater more towards the collector.
Yes.
The English side is
And
always...
they didn't at all before.
Yeah.
In the very beginning, they didn't even put numbers on their cards. you
Yeah,
know?
and like,
And
if you look at, for example, the Pokemon centers, they do even those little cheap promos that are like maybe $10 a piece.
Yes.
But it's like you get a nice little unique artwork of Pikachu, and they're similar to all the other Poncho Pikachus and things like that. So that's really acknowledging the collector, in my opinion. Like the whole Pokemon Center setup is really there for the collector. So
Yes.
it's nice to see that, at least on the Japanese end.
it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the other questions, this is actually very specific. Gary is probably the biggest proponent of E4. He talks about it more than I do. I would say he brands it even more than I do. So what is it that you like about E4? Because I think you are not only a staple there, or one of the experts there, but I think you have the highest post count as well by a long shot. So what is it about E4 that you enjoy?
Well, yeah, that's a couple different things. The other sites just simply didn't turn me on. You know, the other sites, I felt they really didn't have much to offer for the collector. And when E4 started, 2011?
Yeah, 2010, 2011.
Yeah, 2010, 2011. Even though that's a long time ago, Scott and I have known each other a very long time. He contacted me and he said, you know, Gary, you really should come over and check out E4. We're trying to do something a little bit different, you know, gear it more along lines, you know, for the collector and for the and to be an information website. And me being, you know, a bit of an expert on the subject, he wanted me to get over there where I could participate. Plus, I saw value in you know, what I could learn also. Well, it's turned out to be that and much more. E4, there is no other site like it for those who are really serious about the game and all aspects of the game, the nuances of the game. I'm pretty sure that's what Scott had in mind when he started off as the founder of the great site. So, you know.
Yeah, I think to contextualize it too, I think every site or every, let's say, like hype channel or mine's more informational, plays a role. You know, everybody has a role to fill in the hobby, and I think E4's is definitely the undisputed information or expert opinion resource, and it's only becoming more pronounced with time, because the more people that enter the game, the more inexperience you have, or the more rumors you have. I remember, you know, somebody mentioned on E4 how someone had a Magneton card at their store, and they're like, oh my god, that's the 1995 original Magneton. It's like there's so many things in there that, you know, they're misunderstanding, but that's just a great example of how the market is today. There's just so much general interest, there's so much growth at large that, you know, you really do need some type of concentrated resource, and I do think that's really the role E4 ultimately fills for the hobby.
And if any of you want an answer to a question Pokemon related, no matter how you know, how much you feel, no matter what you think about it, come to E4, make a thread, ask the question, and you will get an answer. And you won't get an answer the next day or the day after. You'll probably get an answer within minutes.
Yeah.
Because there's so many of us, you know, that do have the experience and the knowledge. And the one thing about E4 is that we want to share it, and we do share it. Go through our past threads, and you're gonna. It's like an encyclopedia it's the encyclopedia of the Pokemon that you can find on the internet. So,
yeah. And for people who are intimidated, because I think E4, I don't really talk about the forum that often in videos, but people who might be intimidated because there can be serious discussion, or there's a lot of serious discussion, don't ever feel intimidated to post anything. You know, I try to make threads that will talk just about artwork or your experiences with the hobby. So yes, you can talk about, do you think that this stamp was applied correctly, and is the alignment correct, and is the ink correct, and is the air correct? Yeah, you'll have that really get down to the rabbit hole type discussions, but there's also things about artwork and general appreciation as well. So don't feel intimidated, because we all started somewhere. I started not knowing, and that's how you have to start for everything. So with that said, one of the questions you actually asked me in another Q&A was, if I didn't get into Pokemon, what would it be that I collected instead? So I'm going to throw that at you. If you didn't get into Pokemon and Charizard and Venusaur, what would you collect in replace of that?
Okay, I go back a long ways. I've been collecting since the 1960s, and I have always been a collector at heart, and I've always been, an accumulator of everything from, baseball cards from the 1950s to to the non-sports cards in the 1970s, the TV show cards from the 1960s. I've always been into a Grateful Dead memorabilia, Kiss memorabilia. Heck, I remember in 1979, which is 40 years ago, I lived in Los Angeles, and I went to every single outdoor newsstand and bought every single #1 Kiss comic, which was made with real members of Kiss blood put into the ink. And I just knew that was going to be a solid collectible and a super cool item to own. I was the only one, it was $2.95 for that magazine, I remember to this day. And I went everywhere, picked up every single one, because again, I had an eye for collectibles, and I just knew that, I liked Kiss, and I knew that would be an awesome collectible. So, with that in mind, what would I have done? I just went through so many things up until 1998 or 1999 that I certainly would have continued with all those. But honestly, nothing could have replaced Pokemon, because at that time, in those years, there was nothing to compare to Pokemon. And when you have kids, you kind of share in their hobbies and their interests, and this was. So I can't really say there was something I would replace it with.
Yeah.
Because I had other things before and picked up things since, but nothing on the level of Pokemon. Nothing had the effect of Pokemon on us as parents, as collectors, as buyers, as sellers, as parents, as brothers and sisters. There was just simply nothing like it. Yes, Yu-Gi-Oh came out soon after, but I was very much there at that time, and it was nowhere on the level of Pokemon. So to this day, I would say nothing could replace Pokemon. Nothing in 1999 and nothing in 2018 can replace Pokemon.
And I think, to piggyback off of that, Pokemon is so unique in that I remember seeing a post on Reddit recently on the front page talking about how that Pokemon has the most, I forget the exact term for a media franchise, the most revenue, the most profit for a media franchise, and that's even above Star Wars, which is 20 years older. And people were saying how the difference with Pokemon is you can have these individual feelings and experiences between Gen 1, Gen 2, 3, 4, whatever it may be, and you're not going to be criticized for that. Where I think in Star Wars, it's okay, there's people who like the originals and the prequels and then now the new ones, and there's all this constant, battling of who has the best opinion of Star Wars. Where with Pokemon, you can really just have your own niche and have a unique experience that might not be reciprocated by every single person, and that's okay. It has, in my opinion, it has the best balance of, I would say, critical series collecting, but also a casual entry point as well.
Right.
And it just really hits pretty much everyone on some level. So yeah, I'm in the same boat. I don't know what I would do without.
And can I add to that Pokemon was more than just a collectible. It was obviously a game, and a very special game. And a huge percentage of the young players from back then became collectors later. And I would say it'd be safe to say 60 to 80% of everybody watching this video was a player at one time, moved into the collectible side. The advantage Pokemon had over all those other things, and which is why I find it hard to replace, is like with the baseball cards and with the collectible non-sports cards, they weren't games. They were simply items to collect and look at. It didn't have the base of being a playing game first, moving into the collectible side of it. Kids picked them up to look at the pictures. Pokemon cards they picked up to play the game.
Yes.
And of course now those kids are all at a later age with money, and now they're in the collectible side of it. So I couldn't replace it.
Yeah, same here. And I think when Gary and I have just been basically sitting in this exact position talking over these past few days, and one of the things we talked about was back in the day, how Gary actually, this is probably relevant for the question, Gary actually used to call shadowless no shadow. He's the one who termed that, and then eventually shadowless became the ubiquitous term that we all use now.
Yeah, and a better term than the one I came up with.
Yeah, it just rolls off the tongue. But
Right.
but it's funny because when we were talking about that, we both realized, back then the internet wasn't what it is today, but every kid knew what shadowless was.
Yes.
I remember seeing a card that was shadowless and it blew my mind. And I think that's just another example of how unique Pokemon is that you everybody knew about Charizard, everybody knew about the red-cheeked Pikachu, or all these little nuances. Even before the internet, it just traveled at light speed.
Yes, it did.
Because you had this unique interest where, I grew up with sports my whole life, and it just doesn't have that same connectivity.
Right.
It doesn't have that. So, yeah, I don't really think there is a replacement.
No.
It's too unique. So,
I could replace I could give a good answer to that question with just about every single other collectible category I
same
know,
here. Exactly.
except for this game. That's
Yeah.
the uniqueness, and that's why 25 years later, it's stronger than it was back then, and that's why probably 25 years from now it'll be even stronger.
Yeah. So, with
There's
that,
no replacing it.
with that in mind, talking about all the hordes of collections you have and everything, how does your family or wife feel about being constantly buried in Pokemon cards? Because you can't see off camera, but there's a nice organized section of boxes, but there's a lot of boxes.
And it's been worse. It's been worse. My wife, Ava, she is, even though she's not into Pokemon, she's into me, and what's important to me is very important to her. I'm extremely fortunate to have somebody who can put up with the residual effects of being into this hobby to such a great extent. So Ava is a treasure for me because she accepts me as I do her. The things we enjoy. And I think it's a good lesson for all of us. What's important to your spouse, girlfriend, parents, siblings, what's important to them, has to be important to you because it means a lot to them and you care about them. So fortunately, I have somebody who feels that way. And our little daughter, this is Akara in the background. She's 3.5 now. She loves Pokemon, and she has done something great for me, and that is forced me to organize better and to get things out of reach, get them up, don't leave them out. If they're not here, I have valuable cards all over the place that I'm messing with for submissions and all this. Well, when she's here, I'm forced to keep things neater and cleaner, which my wife appreciates. She'll accept me the way I am. But she loves that side effect of little Akara, our daughter. So
one thing I would throw in there is that Gary found, so under this little footrest here, there was a Gold Star Charizard that at minimum is a 9. Like on the worst day possible, it's probably a strong 9, 10. And it's just like he completely forgot that it was in here. It's like this is his life, is that he has so many cards.
Right, and also part of the reason for that is that I don't sell them. I keep them so I can afford to forget about them because I'm not waiting to get them and get them great, to get them jumped up right onto eBay. But in that case, it really is interesting. There's 2 pieces of glass I keep inside here that are very heavy, almost an inch thick. I think 3/4 inch glass. That I put my cards in to try to get the little bow out, and if there is a bow. Well, I got that Gold Star Charizard, who knows when. I put it between that glass, who knows when. And long time later, I went in there for something else and I happened to see it. And I have absolutely no clue, where I got it from. And yes, and when I put it away like that to straighten it, it was probably worth about 20% of what it is today. So, that gives me a little bit of an excuse, I think, because, a $5,000 card, totally forgetting about it seems odd.
Yeah,
but back then it wasn't that valuable, and
I think it speaks to patience is a virtue, and perhaps occasional forgetfulness is also a
Right.
virtue.
And now if I was going to sell it, if I needed it to sell at the time, obviously my memory would be a lot better if I get it on eBay where I could forget about it until it's sold. So.
So one of the final things here is a pretty specific one. So this is something actually that I have known about Gary, and I think some of the members on E4 do. It's a couple larger deals he did, and I really wanted to pick your brain and talk about these because I think a lot of people aren't aware not only of the size or magnitude of the deal, but how they really built the foundation for Pokemon, and that is the CD promos that you did back in 98, 99.
Yes.
And basically, if you could just give people a good summary of everything that's involved, because this is always a great story to hear.
Right. I don't know how many people would remember, but prior to English Pokemon's base release, prior to that, the Japanese game had the hype and all that from the Japanese game spread to the United States. In fact, my very first memory of Pokemon was reading an article, a newspaper, about an episode of a Pokemon cartoon that had flashing lights and circular colored things, and it was causing kids to have seizures in Japan.
The electric soldier Porygon.
Legitimate seizures, being physically affected by that. And I don't know, I remember thinking, oh, cool. I said, this must be real. This must be really, really neat. And so there wasn't internet back then, and I did, internet searches and that, and did find it, and watched it, and it totally. I was hoping it would affect one of my kids. They were maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, at the time, but it didn't affect them. I think it affected, me more so, and maybe still to this day.
Right.
But hearing that, just made me think, what a cool thing. And I knew it was coming to America. And so I thought, well, how can I get involved in this? And I got in touch with got in touch through an intermediary, some people at Media Factory in Japan, which produced the early Pokemon cards. And I wanted to be involved in its coming to America in some small way, and hopefully on the ground floor that would turn into something super big. Well, what I did didn't turn into something super big, but it was like the first step, coming into America, because these stories in Pokemon, the news spread like wildfire that it was coming to America. So, kind of like when the Beatles got off the plane at LaGuardia in 1963, we knew before they got off the plane that they were on the way, and so, I knew it was coming. Anyway, I did get in on the first step. I was able to go through a 7,800 CD promo purchase, and having been involved with PSA at the time, plus having graded many sports cards during the 90s, I thought that would be a good idea too, to get them graded. It was a little bit of a miscalculation. It wasn't, although it did well. It was a little bit of miscalculation because it didn't do great, and I probably could have done better if I kept everything raw. Maybe sold the CDs, packaged, or maybe just sold the singles, open. It might have come out better. So it was a little bit of miscalculation, but it did good. It did okay. And so we took out the big three. Even then there was a big three, even before it hit the shores, Charizard, Blastoise, Venusaur. And we put them into PSA cases, tons of 10s, tons of 9s, and sold them in groups of 3 on our United States Home Shopping Network. And the kids, again, the buzz came like wildfire, kind of like you have brush all around your house and there's a fire coming and it immediately engulfs you. That is what happened with Pokemon, with all the kids there. Everybody knew it was coming. Everybody knew, was excited and waiting for it. And so with that being the very first thing to hit the market, it did okay. So now I was hoping to build that into something further, but the relationship ended immediately. when it became so successful in the United States, my relationship ended immediately with Media Factory.
Mhm.
So, and because they wanted it all to themselves, understandably.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was like the beginning of English Pokemon.
And to add to that,
Pokemon coming to America.
yeah, to add to that whole situation, I think people don't understand the magnitude, first of all, of grading those 7,000 or 7,800 cards. Those
$2.75 a card. Just to throw that.
Yeah, there you go. And like people don't realize that really set the foundation for Pokemon's relationship with PSA. You know, I think a lot of things we take for granted with grading today is that these have to exist because of someone else's work. And if you really were around in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, you know, there wasn't much activity with Pokemon PSA, and without those base cards or the CD promos that you did, we wouldn't have the foundation that we do today. And you know, I think a lot of people hear those, like this story, for example, when I think these cards sold like $400 or something like that for the full set of 3 of them, PSA 10, and like the whole Birthday Pikachu thing. Birthday Pikachu was selling for 500 PSA 10, and people thought it was rarer than it really was. But all of this, you know, understanding or misunderstanding is really what shapes this hobby moving forward. Because like we learned from some of the mistakes, and they really provided us with the opportunity today. So this is just one, I would say, big chunk of why we have such a good relationship with PSA.
Yeah, one step leads to the next step, leads to the next step.
Exactly.
And even the missteps lead to the next step. And there have been missteps. If you don't mind me, it's not a question you gave me, but if you don't mind me bringing it up, the missteps that are happening today, and those missteps from today are bad for the hobby. Things like fake cards, custom cards, all that garbage. Those are missteps. That is almost like taking a step backwards. And so, you know, but those early steps, yeah, it took each one of those steps to lead to where we are today. And Scott and I and every single person watching is going to take that next step too, and the step after that. So, you know, so make them, you know, honorable, honest steps, because our hobby will continue to grow, and the love for the hobby, will remain.
So with that said, is there any other thoughts you want to throw on here?
You know, I wanted to say, you know, one thing. I did an interview recently with Leon Hart, which I know, you know, everybody in the Pokemon internet world is familiar with Leon. He, people like that have done a great deal for our hobby also. Okay, they are the ones taking those next steps and getting us progressed, but there's more than just an entertainment side to this hobby. You know, there is an information side, and I know Scott hates it when I bring this stuff up, but you have to go to E4 to see what this is all about. To learn the nuances. You know, meet the big names, the old timers in the game, meet new friends. You're gonna find a very great mix of Pokemon people on E4. And I know Leon Hart and his community, the Hart Squad. I know that, you know, they have a true inherent interest in Pokemon that I think they would find just as interesting on our E4 site and on Scott smPratte's channel, YouTube channel. You know, so come along, let's make this grow. And I don't mean to embarrass Scott. You know, I'm sorry, but I feel so strongly about this. And I tell this to you, and I tell it to the kid at the local card store that I run into, the same thing, because I think it's important for this hobby. It's the right side of the hobby. It's the strong side of the hobby. It's the good side of the hobby. You know, let's promote and participate in those things. Yeah. Sorry, Scott.
No, it's fine. Every time you do this, we give you these compliments. I don't know how to handle it because I'm not the channel that is like, please like, comment, subscribe. Like I just,
right.
I don't know. So I always appreciate it though. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything we have. Hopefully, this will be one of multiple, I guess, interviews or discussions with Gary. It's something that just naturally occurs when we're together. We just start talking about the hobby, and we're like, you know, maybe we should just put a camera up so other people can hear this conversation. But
can I say one thing, Scott? I made one condition on doing these videos with Scott, Both the one with our transaction from the previous video, hopefully you'll see. This one, my one condition was he had to let me interview him. And so he promised me he would let, and Scott doesn't like to get interviewed. I don't think so. Right?
Yeah, ironically, I have a channel, my face is out there, but naturally I'm pretty reserved. And
pretty private, pretty private. Except I demanded that for this to work, he had to give me the opportunity to interview him. Plus I thought people would be interested in a little bit different side, of smpratte than what you see. So anyway, we're gonna, get together and make a third video where I'm going to be interviewing Scott, so be sure to watch out for that. It'll be fun.
So there you go. There's the part 3 of this segment. So hopefully you guys found this entertaining, useful, interesting, something memeable. But that's pretty much it. And until next time.